Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, how the heck are you? We are well into March now. It's springtime. Is it springing where you're at? Are you enjoying spring? We're not quite at spring when I'm recording, so I'm really ready for some springtime. This episode with Jen, it takes us a little bit of time to kind of get into the meat of things because we didn't really know where we were going to head in this episode, but we really talk about things in our relationship, about our attachment, where we're both at, about Jen's challenge with kind of opening up and being present. I'm finally, after almost 5 years, settling a little bit into the relationship. I talk about a little blip that happened and the fears that came up for me. And then we also, at the end, we talk about, I hadn't really talked to Jen about going back to Philly this year. I plan on it, but hadn't talked about it, hadn't planned. And there was some stuff going on for me around that. And when a client had a very parallel situation, I realized that the client was talking about her friend and her friend wasn't committing to a trip that they had talked about. That, I'm like that to Jen right now and didn't really want to talk about it. And when Jen and I did, something really surprising and unexpected came out of that. I think it's a great episode. And it really helped me clarify that what I do best is talking about what's going on in things that are relational. And I keep thinking that I'm supposed to be providing a different kind of content to you. And I'm sure as you listen to episodes, you can tell which episodes are rich and deep because I'm doing what I love, and which episodes I'm trying to provide education around things that it's just more difficult for me. And when I can integrate it into the stories about what's going on, that's really where my passion is. I think that's all I have. And now, on to the show. Hey, Jen, how are you?
Hi, my friend. I'm good. I can say right now, I think it's just life, right? Lots of ups and downs, but I'm feeling pretty centered, pretty grounded, and so thankful that I have good people around me to help co-regulate and create a container of safety for me to just have my big feelings in. So thank you for being one of those people for me.
Oh, you're welcome. You do have a lot going on. You always have a lot going on, but you have a lot more going on right now.
Universe is like, here, you want some stuff with your stuff? How about another helping of stuff?
Yeah.
But
it's interesting. So you and I spent some time before we hit record trying to figure out what to talk about. And I had an awareness as I was listening to you. There's a podcast that I listen to and I feel like they have a topic and they really stay focused on that topic and are able to share personal experience, but it feels very linear to me. And I have judgment that that's not my style. And I keep thinking that these are neurodivergent folks also. I think the way my neurodivergence shows up is I really like connecting and talking about what's going on in the moment. And sometimes when there's not a lot going on, I struggle. And you and I talked about content for today, but it's not content that's feeling like it's not my stuff. And so I don't feel like I have as much to say. And I did record a solo episode yesterday since you and I weren't able to record, but I Googled some content because I wanted to record something and I don't have a lot going on right now that I'm aware of or that I haven't talked about before. So I just want to name that I'm having this struggle of I want to be linear. I'm not linear. And I told you when we jumped on that the episode that I did, that's the one that's going to air before this one about red flags and green flags in relationships. I don't feel like there was a lot of personal information in it because I felt compelled to get content out because we've gotten so behind on recordings. And really who I am is I want to talk about what's going on. I want to talk about what's feeling passionate to me. I want to talk about what's feeling alive for me. And when there's not anything, I don't know what to do. And I feel compelled to create content. And I'm sure that there are things that are alive for me that are important that I'm just not thinking of, but I just want to be really vulnerable and transparent and share. I'm having a struggle in this moment about, I don't think I want to stick to what we were going to talk about because it's not feeling very alive for me.
I hear that. I do. I want to just say that I love how open-heartedly you show up here in this space on your podcast, that I aspire to it. I'd love to have the kind of freedom that I feel when I'm listening to you. I'm curious about that for myself and kind of reflective and not sure what I would need to feel a little less guarded.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe tied to what we were talking about I know that some of my worldview is feeling kind of like, oppressed upon by meeting other people's ideas about who I am in their heads, and so for me to get curious and kind and to be open and vulnerable enough, I think that's your gift. I also want to point out that, over the course of your podcast, over the life of the podcast, that there have certainly been times where you were far more structured, linear, and that this kind of, I don't know if it's a life cycle or if it's just going through different seasons or phases of it, but, I really do want to honor what's alive in you right now.
Thank you.
And be here as that support for you. I'm always okay going off trail. We can bushwhack through whatever, I was going to say BS, right?
Right.
Arising, or maybe that's kind of an unkind way to put it or call it, but whatever. That's kind of spontaneity, and I love that stuff. Like whatever, I don't know. If I know what's going to come next half the time, right?
Yeah. Well, as you were talking, I had a thought, and it was something that you and I had talked about yesterday when we were just FaceTiming, that I don't want to say regret, because if it were to happen again, I wouldn't do anything differently. When I learned about being autistic, when I was diagnosed autistic, I felt like King Kong on the top of the Empire State Building, beating my chest about autism, that felt really important to me. I'm continuing to learn and be astounded at my life and how my PDA and how my autism and how my disordered eating, all those connections. It's really exhilarating and painful to be working with this therapist who's ADHD, who understands PDA. I'm just continually astounded. And here I show up very vulnerable, but I'm choosing what to share. So I have control over that, because I've talked to my therapist about this, because I go to therapy, and yesterday she made a comment about something. She's like, how does that land with you? I'm like, I feel really exposed. And this concept of being perceived, that are these things see, I'm not even ready to talk about it with you, the listener, but the fact that you see this makes me feel really uncomfortable, and I don't want another diagnosis. And I feel like this is what my idea of this thing, how it shows up. And she's just so beautiful. And Jen, I do want to do an episode with you about what good therapy looks like, and especially when you're working with neurodivergent folks. But she said, I recognize it because I have it. I recognize with this and, some of the things that go on with my thinking. It just took everything down a notch for me. It was towards the end of the session, so we didn't have time to talk more about it. So I would like to talk about it with her more, and we're not meeting next week because she's not available. But in therapy, she's bringing up things that I haven't ever considered before, and it makes me feel incredibly vulnerable and exposed, and there's so much more trauma there than I even realized. So I want to be very clear that while I show up in one way here on the podcast, in therapy, I'm feeling really exposed and vulnerable. So it's not across the board, and wherever we're at is really okay. But dropping back to what I was talking about, that it felt really important for a certain amount of time that having my autism front and forward was very important. It's still a big part of who I am. So I'm not changing that or wanting to move away from that. But my son was working on a new logo for the podcast where we were going to call it Unapologetically Sensitive and Autistic. And as I've been reflecting about what is it, like, who am I and what content do I really know? And it's the relational content. I think when you and I talk about our relationship, how we're growing, how we're changing, the struggles, so much of, I think, the rich content in historical episodes is one I have. I seem to have lots of them, blips in relationships, conflicts, things that are upsetting and frustrating to me. It's all centered around things that are relational. That's my special interest. That's what I'm good at. That's what I focus on. the conversations that you and I have are incredibly rich. And that's really what I want the focus to be on. And being neurodivergent is a part of that and how that impacts what goes on. But it's helped me to recenter and to reshift. And I have to say, it's still hard when I look at some other content creators around autism. Like, I want to be doing what they're doing, but I think my gift is to talk about what goes on for me, you and I to talk about what goes on in our relationship, and then how my autism and my neurodivergence impact that. But I feel like I lost a lot of listeners when I started to talk about autism, and they're not here, so it doesn't really matter because they're not they're not hearing this. And again, I don't know that I would do it differently, but I'm just having this awareness of what happened and where I'm at now and what's feeling important and significant to me.
Yes. I often think that you offer your gift, and honestly, if it reaches one person, sometimes we just say the right thing in the right way. I mean, I don't know anything about our metrics or anything about, any of that stuff. I don't know if I had access to it, if I'd be that inclined to look at it. And I don't know. I tend to be more of that, just following the energy of things. Mm-hmm. I respect people that are more planful. I wish I had some of that. Mm-hmm. But I appreciate certainly what you're doing and feel honored to be invited in. And I know that you get, good feedback.
Yeah.
And who knows, right? Like, sometimes, like, you just never know what that is. Because I think it's, for someone to get prompted to reach out to tell you is a lot. And that there's probably plenty of people that don't reach out.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to me. We have all of these new means of expression, right? And connectivity. And I don't even like to go back and re-listen. I just kind of show up wholehearted, put it out there, and it goes where it goes.
And you
and I are the poem.
You and I are so opposite because I look at the metrics, I watch them. They have shifted and downloads are down, and that it is a little discouraging to me. And I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing until I decide not to. If you are a listener of the podcast and you appreciate and enjoy this, please share it. If you're on social media, if you're in autism groups, regardless of how you identify, if you find value, please tell other people about the podcast, because I'm not getting the downloads that I used to. I used to be on the top 300 of the Apple podcast for quite some time. And then when I took that break, I just fell off and I'm just not getting the downloads. That doesn't impact what I do. My goal is to touch people and to have you know that there's nothing wrong with you and that you're not alone. And I feel a little bit sad that I'm not getting the listens that I used to. And that's not to discount the fact that you're here and you're listening. I'm just being really transparent. There was something else that you said where I thought, yeah, and I'm just the opposite. So, I think that's part of the beauty of the yin and the yang in our relationship. Oh, I do listen to the episodes. I usually, the day that we record, I mix them together. And that night when I go to bed, I listen to them because I kind of want to get a sense. And if I can't sleep, I re-listen to episodes. So we are very different, and that's okay.
Yeah. I think I have some work to do there. I think it would be good for me maybe to listen, and for me also to just be a little more grounded. So we'll see. I don't know. I'm not sure what's going on for me that I'm like, it feels like a really long vulnerability hangover that I can't dip myself back into. I think when I was explaining to someone in my life, like my relationship with, I guess, the podcast, not you and me, not our relationship, but recognizing that I still do have this voracious inner critic that I don't even want to tempt to come out.
Right.
And because maybe I think I might be scared that it would stop me from showing up quite as freely if I opened that track to. And so it's probably not a bad idea for me to try it and see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the things that I've noticed for me in the last couple of weeks is that something has shifted in our relationship for me. I don't know about, it feels like for you as well. But from my perspective, and ironically, because of my experience growing up, and again, this is just my history and I'm not placing blame anywhere. because my mom was a single mother and her goal was to recreate a family, when she would date different people, my role with her changed. And part of my parentification, part of just how I'm wired to being the little professor and knowing how to solve things and being very competent, that when partners would come in, if they didn't really enjoy children, then I was relegated to however much space they had for me. And that was very, very painful. Again, I'm not blaming my mom. I'm just saying what is. And so what I learned is my security and my attachment in a relationship is not solid and permanent. It's dependent on who else comes into the picture and how much room that person has for me. That's pretty hard for a young child. That's just hard. And as you've dated people, it activates my attachment injuries. And because my only frame of reference of what happens to my primary, you're not my primary relationship, but you're my primary friendship. And so as you've dated people, it activates those fears of what has happened in the past and how much time is this person taking up, and is our relationship shifting or changing? And you've had space for me to talk about this. And there's something that happened recently when I was able to share with you some of my fears, that my sense of attachment and security got stronger. And there's something in me that just relaxed a notch, went this is okay.
Yeah.
I suspect too, I feel really vulnerable. I feel, I feel tearful sharing this with you. That I think March will be 5 years that we've known each other. And the part of me that has really had some painful ruptures in relationships and friendships that I thought we were going to grow old together and they didn't. And there's the part of me that's very doubtful, very suspicious, doesn't trust, has been sitting back with her arms crossed going, well, how does Jen live her life? And I want to see what she does to other relationships. And I'm going to observe and see what she does, because whatever she does in her relationships, she's probably going to do to me. And what I've seen is that you show up beautifully and consistently. And as you've gone through dating and relationships and your divorce and seeing how you show up in really hard situations, I think that's allowed my nervous system to relax also. It's funny, I have embarrassment telling you this. It's taken me 5 years to go oh, maybe this is okay. And it's not that I haven't trusted, but it's just a deeper level of trust. But something just really has shifted in me and is relaxing a little bit more.
I'm so glad.
How is it hearing that? I feel super vulnerable sharing that with you.
Well, I think one of the strengths of our friendship is you're allowed to have your process and the stuff from your past and the stuff that, with me being able to kind of, I don't know, I just feel like we have this, we're boundaried in that way where we're not ricocheting off of each other. And I know you've got this and that you can really take care of yourself and share what comes up for you without me having to be oh no, I gotta go do something about that. Yeah. As opposed to just kind of co-creating this friendship together. So that feels good. It feels, you're pulling back the curtain and letting me see what goes on for you.
Yeah. And
your perspective and reflections for me have been so helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So, I feel blessed by our friendship in so many ways. And I think I have some kind of parallel that also feels more secure. And that, when we know about attachment, you can achieve secure attachment as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really about knowing your story, making sense out of it, seeing how being willing to be in relationship with the wounded parts of ourselves that engage in certain patterns.
And that doesn't mean that there won't be insecurities, because last week something came up in this sense of being very secure. So I'm having this little gremlin, part of the story I need to say what happened. And it's not my intention to say well, you blah, 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 but something happened which activated this thing for me. So do I have your permission to proceed?
Yes.
I think I had left a polo for you, and then you responded with a great long polo, but didn't reflect the things that I had talked about. And with Josh, my son, leaving for the Navy, he has a set date now. It's just getting hard. And I listened to it early in the morning, and my initial thought was I felt angry and frustrated because this is also important to me. Like, what's important to you is important. And I love that you shared. And I felt like, wait, my stuff is also very important. I didn't know what to do with that. And I sat with it for the day, but I didn't doubt our relationship. I didn't feel like you don't love me, you don't care. It's just that you have a lot going on and sometimes you don't reflect what's going on with me. And part of how I think I get my value and worth is by making sure that I reflect. So part of this is my own fear of like, if I didn't do that, do I have value and would people want to be with me? So I own that part. And later on in the day, I sent you a text and just said, I felt sad and disappointed that you didn't respond to this. This is really something big in my life. And during the day, you have clients, we're on different time zones, so I don't always know what's happening. But when there was that delay, and my therapist asked me at the end of every session, what's going on in your body? And I effing hate it. I effing hate that she does. We talk about it. I hate it. And I thought, what's going on in my body? And the tears came. And I felt so much fear and insecurity that a lot of my history is about not having people respond to me. You know, my father leaving and being absent. So no response. And this wasn't that it was a no response. It was you didn't respond yet. But in my body, it felt like it wasn't a response. And I felt so much fear in this, like you're going to get angry with me. And I always have this, even in the morning when I was feeling angry, like, but you showed up and you poloed me and you shared, and it was a long polo and you told me all the things that were going on. And you always tell me how much you appreciate me and how I am there for you. And it's still okay for me to have that need to be reflected with things that are going on. But I have this like, this is going to ruin the relationship and it's never good enough for me and I'm always wanting more. And so in this moment where I was feeling this vulnerability and this I'm being too much and having all these tears come up, it's fascinating to watch. And I felt relatively secure in the relationship. And so I'm sharing this with you because you can have a secure attachment, which allows you to have feelings of hurt, disappointment, and do healing. Both of those can happen in the same moment. You know, we have the gift of being able to hold that space for each other. And I own what goes on for me. So it's, you know, this kind of ties into what we were going to talk about that we're not talking about, you know, is that I'm not telling you, well, you disappointed me and you let me down and you're never here for me, and having these expectations of who you are, as opposed to, I know you have a lot going on and you've given me permission to kind of rein you in when I'm not getting the responses that are feeling important to me.
Yes. More than just permission to rein me in. Like, I think I've been pretty, I don't know, it's my ADHD, it's my like crazy life, I guess, but I do sincerely, at least in our context and how we do it, it's a gift. You know, it's a gift to the relationship, not to let me know what's coming up for you, to communicate that, give me an opportunity to respond, even if it's a little later. You know, and I do think that we had a good moment, right? I forget exactly what my response was when it did come, but the one thing that I've been working on for the last couple of years, and I think I'm in a pretty good place with it, is releasing this self-defensiveness. I think I've mentioned that on the podcast before, right? That I can hear what's coming up for you without it automatically making me bad or wrong.
Right.
And that's something in my tropes, right? Being held up mirrors that I'm evil or inherently bad. I know I'm laughing about that now, but I've done some good healing about that. Those are pain points, right? So realizing, you know, that's just healing work, right? It's being willing to be in relationship with your own history and your own tropes. And when it gets activated, knowing that that's mine, right? That's mine to handle. And so the emotional availability and openness to hearing, what was that like for you? I mean, I practice a lot with my kids, right? Having the humility to hear the ways in which, what did Aster say? I'm unpleasant to be around sometimes.
Yeah.
And I let people down without that being catastrophic. Really. You know, and I think it's interesting because I do kind of come at this from this like hyper independence and aloofness, and me starting recently to be like, I need you. Like this chapter is kind of, I'm going to call it the letting people in chapter, and letting myself have needs and acknowledge. I mean, I've always had needs, right? It's just the degree to which I was comfortable having them and then being able to communicate them. So you've been a source of inspiration for me to be able to communicate. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's a gift. Like, teach me how to do that. Because I'll tend to go like, well, I don't need anything. I'm not even going to give you a chance to disappoint me.
Right.
I'm going to have no needs.
Right. If you're neurodivergent, if you're autistic, that is classic PDA, pathological demand avoidance, pervasive drive for autonomy, being hyper independent, not needing anybody, not wanting anything, being very competent and capable. That is the ultimate of, I don't need you, you can't hurt me, you can't disappoint me. And our society values independence so much that that's often applauded. And what we really want is interdependence, where we can function outside of the relationship, but we count on each other and need each other to meet certain needs. And as long as it's mutually agreeable, which it is, and you and I are really good about owning our stuff, and we have the gift of being able to work out a lot of our stuff about each other in the relationship, where we can't always do that, and that's not always ideal. Like, I'm going through some stuff around my son leaving in the military, and I did share that with him, but I'm not going to process what comes up for me with him. That's something I need to process somewhere else. But for the most part, you and I are able to talk about those things in our relationship in a contained way, but the young parts come up, but I think we do a very good job shepherding them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, energetically, it doesn't, I think there's just a lot of safety, and I'm feeling safer, like even inside, inside with myself, the self-compassion work, I'm not going to be in that adversarial relationship with myself. And so we can talk about things without it having to be, I think a lot of times people in relationship, I know this is true for me, like your threat alarm, signals have gone off. And so then it is fight or flight, as opposed to a collaborative opportunity to get to know you better.
Yeah. And if you're late diagnosed, I don't think we even consciously recognize that we're in fight, flight, fawn, freeze, people please. That it's so interesting as I'm really trying to unpack and look at my autism and where does it show up and how does it show up. I'm perpetually confused because by age 60, I figured out how to do these things. There's probably some internal cost that I'm not aware of, but I've just figured out how to make these pivots. And then when I slow the process down, like that day that I texted you, like what's going on inside of my body, and then, ooh, there it was. Because I've learned how to not connect to those things and to just do whatever I need to do to push through or to manage, or then I have a shutdown. But I don't consciously register, oh, I'm in fight or flight. This is a PDA response. It is so integrated into who I am, whether that's adaptive or not.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that taking that, I know for me, taking that time to reflect, and sometimes journaling can help. And some of the hallmarks for me are when I'm curious about myself and others. I always just keep coming back to that. It's this, and the minute I'm so sure, that to me is like part of the signal of like the fight or flight. Like if I just think I know, and it's like protection, right? It's like this protective, yeah. And I appreciate the presence that you've been as, again, coming out of a 20-year relationship and then going into having these dating experiences has been wild, and talk about an opportunity for attachment stuff to come up.
Yeah. And I think part of my gift is pattern recognition. As I've watched you, date a couple different people and then seeing themes come up that really aren't related to you, but feel, your perception is they're related to you. And my pattern recognition ends up being helpful because I'm constantly taking notes about things, not consciously, but that's just how my brain works.
Yes. Yeah. No, it's been good to find my center, and I kind of, centering myself, right? Boundaries and centering and knowing that that's okay. Yeah. It feels good. It feels good.
Yeah. I think one last thing I want to touch on, and then we're going to wrap up, that I've been thinking about, and you and I just talked about it recently. I have a client, I'm terrible at coming up with names. So let's call her Sally. And she has a best friend whose name is Barbara. And their relationship is very similar to ours. And my client's a therapist also. And Barbara was supposed to come out and visit Sally, but Barbara has a lot of things going on in her life. And Sally was anticipating it and looked at taking time off but Barbara wasn't bringing it up. And it was bringing up some feelings for Sally. So we talked about having that conversation with Barbara about what that's about. And as Sally was talking about all of the things that was activating for her, I thought, in my relationship with you, I'm Barbara.
Uh-huh.
and as I'm having this whole session with Sally and she's telling me about all the discomfort that's coming up for because a couple times you and Liv have said like, when are you coming out? When do you come visit? And I just have not responded. And so at the end of the session, I have a really good relationship with this client that when the session was over, we talked for a few minutes and I said, I'm Barbara. And then I thought, is it my place to tell you? Or if you're feeling uncomfortable, is it your place to say, hey, I've asked you about coming out a couple times and you haven't? And we did end up talking about it. And I don't recall who initiated it. And it's interesting because, I let you know what my hesitation was. And part of it was being in burnout too. And with my son leaving and not wanting to come out when it's hot. And so we did finally talk about it. I usually am really good about bringing up things. And I find myself recently like just sitting on things and not talking about it. But then you asked, would it be okay if you came out? And I'm like, without a beat, like I would love that. And it was so interesting because in my mind that wasn't even an option the way that our lives are, that I just didn't think that you would be able to come out and visit again. And then I got really excited that I've been wanting to send you promotional information from where I lived.
Oh, that's funny.
But I don't want to pressure you.
Well, and both are true, right? Because it still is logistically difficult for me to get out there.
Yeah.
But in the contrast, it's lovely to see the desire to, even if there are limiting factors right now.
Yeah.
That's a theme in a lot of ways in my life right now, that there's desire but limiting factors. And we may still be able to pull it off. I'm certainly hopeful.
Yeah. I'm still so surprised though that how my body reacts so differently. And I feel like I have to justify and explain it. And I don't think I'm going to. If I naturally do it, I will. For me, when I think about you coming here, it's like, it's like a party and it just feels easy and light because I think traveling entails a lot for me personally. And I love you. I love your family. I love being there. And I have to be in a space where I have energy to be really present and to give and to be part of that. And
there's a lot going on over here.
And it's not a bad thing, but the thought of like you coming here versus me going there, it feels like those are two entirely different propositions.
Absolutely. Like they really are. Yes. Very qualitatively different experiences, just the environments right now. And that's not to say, I'm not throwing myself, my place, my life under the bus here. It's just, woof. I'm in that season. And, that was, I'm sure, you've had that season as well.
Of course. Yeah. I think the thing that surprised me is just that I'm usually good about holding two things at the same time. And I didn't. The only thing I was holding was me going there and then the thought of you coming here. And when you come here, we're two adults that are doing adult things, having adult time and just being able to focus on each other. Where when I go to see you, you are a mom and a family with kids and that's a package deal, which is lovely. But it's a different experience because there are lots of people's needs to take into account and a lot of things that need to be considered. And my need for my own time and attention from you and how much of that do I have to give to your family and what do I need in return for me to stay grounded? Because traveling also brings up things for me.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. I love appreciating the contexts and how they affect us. And it does matter.
Yeah. And I feel like I make room for your context and I don't honor mine. And I think when you mirrored, my life is very different and I'm privileged. But I also went through all of that stuff and I'm just in another place right now. Yeah. Anything else before we wrap up?
I don't think so, my friend. Thank you for spending time with me.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for making time since we couldn't record yesterday. I appreciate it. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great day.
You too, my dear.
Hey again. So did that resonate for you? Do you have relationships where you feel connected? Is it hard for you to talk about what's going on? Do you have a relationship with a therapist or a coach that you feel like really gets you, where you can work through some of these hard things? I just feel really blessed that Jen and I are able to do the work that we can together. And if you are struggling and these things are hard and it resonates and you want to work with Jen, you can reach out to her at jen@heartfulnessconsulting.com, or you can reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive.com. I'm always reluctant to share whether I have space or availability because I never know when people are going to listen. So my suggestion is, if you are drawn to either one of us, reach out, because we never know where we're going to be work-wise when you do. I think that's all I have. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's how your brain is wired. You have a right to feel connected. You have a right to feel hurt. You have a right to feel not seen and heard. You have a right to communicate that. It's okay to feel disappointed. It's okay if you disappoint people. It's okay to feel vulnerable, connected. All of your feelings are okay. It's okay to be angry. Probably need to do an episode on rage, because I have a lot of inner rage. And if you are assigned female at birth, we are raised to be polite and smile, and a lot of our self-harm is inwards, where we overeat, we restrict what we eat, we exercise, we clean, we shut down, we watch TV. We do these things because we never learn that it's safe to get really mad and express our feelings, and our feelings scare us, and we may be in relationships with people that can't manage our feelings because we've never gotten clear with them. All of your feelings are okay. You're okay. It's okay if people get you. It's okay if people don't get you. And our job is to work on our wounding and our healing so that we can find 1, 2, 3 people maybe that we have some relationships with. We may have people that we do activities with that aren't really our primary relationships, but we do stuff with them. I think that's all I have today. Have a blessed day.